Hello one and all, and welcome back to another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. It's actually a bit of a short week this week in terms of different tabs, different news stories that are out there. So I wanted to include some fun stuff for you and some maybe not so fun stuff, depending on how you look at it. A lot of people are up in arms about how they feel about humanoid robots and artificial intelligence in general, and today we'll touch on a little bit of a lot of that. So let's get started. First things first, in terms of a news story that really caught my eye today, I saw this very quick little article about Artifact, which I'd never really heard about. But it's a news app that can read to you. The fun part about this one is that you can use voices like Snoop Dogg or Gwyneth Paltrow, apparently. Which, when you take a look at the list, it's kind of funny, because you got John, and then Snoop Dogg, and then Erica, Emma, Sally, so on, so forth. So as it stands right now, those are the only two official celebrity voices in this update. But apparently there's a couple like Mr. President, which is meant to sound like Obama, and Dwight is meant to sound like Dwight from The Office. So not exact duplicates, but potentially maybe somewhat similar. But when you take a step back to ask yourself what this app is, again, you're having Snoop Dogg read the news article to you, or Gwyneth Paltrow, or Obama, or Dwight. I think the value of something like that is going to be really hit and miss person to person. It could be amazing, especially if you have accessibility issues, let's say vision problems or something like that. I mean, reading these voices in a classic AI voice is kind of lame, so that does spice it up a notch. And while the article doesn't say if these voices are just deepfakes or if they're officially licensed, I imagine they are actually officially licensed, just given the specific names of these actors. I mean, Snoop Dogg's part of FaZe Clan, Gwyneth Paltrow sells vagina candles, so they're not opposed to marketing themselves in very unique ways outside of what their original source of income is. But of course, if I find out that they're not licensed or it's a big scandal or something like that, you'll be the first to know here. And switching gears completely to something very, very different, I want to actually really focus on this for a minute because this could be extremely disconcerting news for a lot of people, or it could be great news for a lot of people, depending again on how you look at things. But Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI are banding together. They've formed a collective to essentially keep control of AI. Now, while the article specifically says they might be doing this to avoid regulation, we have to remember that Sam Altman has been one of the biggest proponents of regulation, calling for regulation, literally going worldwide and asking world leaders, please regulate me. So I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but this certainly does create a power dynamic in the AI landscape. You know, and anytime you see major conglomerates like this, I mean, look at the meat packing companies that essentially control the meat industry. Look at how companies control light bulbs, for example, and they can work together to make sure that things don't work out exactly great for you as a consumer. Those are concerns that I have when I see these mega conglomerates kind of banding together like this, because it doesn't always work out great for the little guy. You're not the person they have in mind in a lot of cases when it comes to safety. What they're really thinking about is the bottom line and corporate greed in a lot of cases. The article quotes specifically that companies creating AI technology have a responsibility to ensure that it's safe, secure, and remains under human control. But I'll remind you that what we're doing is we're essentially allowing these people to control what it is we see, hear, believe, potentially all of the things that get influenced through usage of large language models and AI technologies in general. Now, as a reminder, there have been 0 attempts to date of AI trying to take over the world. Yet it seems we've gone through great lengths to make sure that nothing like that could potentially ever happen, because in 1980-something, somebody made a movie about that. What it seems like in a lot of cases is that news media and these big companies are just capitalizing on that fear to essentially put rules and regulations in place that you wouldn't have agreed to otherwise. And this article does cover some of the skepticism that follows. There's a quote here by Emily Bender, who's a computational linguist at the University of Washington. And what she says is that regulation needs to come externally. It needs to be enacted by the government, representing the people to constrain what these corporations can do. And I do agree to an extent. I don't think that these companies should have full autonomy to control what it is that we have access to. And it does feel like some of those things should be voted on rather than just made corporate policies at certain locations or part of a collective bargaining agreement. And I'm sure I don't need to remind anybody that these companies are not only in direct competition with each other in certain cases, but also in direct partnerships with each other in other cases. Look at Microsoft's relationship to OpenAI, for example. So there's a lot of concerns and a lot of biases, essentially, across the board. But I did want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some good news, because we don't feel like we've had a lot of that recently. And I'm very pleased to announce that SDXL has officially been dropped in a form that you can download it just like Stable Diffusion 1.5, just like 1.4. Stability released a base model as well as a refiner, so it's a little bit of a different process for image creation, but nothing significantly different. If you're using Automatic 1111, for example, that is now very viable. You can just download the model, pop it in, and run it. If there's interest in how to do that, where to find it, all that, leave some comments for me. I'll maybe put together a tutorial video for something like that. But in the meantime, here's some examples of some of the stuff that I've created with it. And on your screen here, there was an example that was in the article as well that was really well done. It's going to be a while before I fully understand how to use the model and prompt to get image results like this, but it's been great so far. Despite how unimpressed I was with SDXL 0.9, SDXL 1.0 is a very big difference. So congratulations to Stability, you guys did an amazing job this time. So the official name for something like this is called outpainting, and then Midjourney had it recently with something called zoom out. Now we're seeing it with Photoshop in uncropping. So what this feature does, which is really cool, is it uses the context of the image to determine what the rest of the image might look like. You know, we've covered similar technologies like this before. You got a beautiful beach, you type beautiful beach, and then boom, it determines the rest of the image based on what you've got. So while this isn't necessarily new technology, it's new to Firefly and it's new to Photoshop. And this is going to be something that I'm sure is going to make a lot of graphic artists very excited. Especially if they're just coming across this for the first time, it's like magic. Now this uncropping they're referring to as generative expansion. And it's not going to be available commercially right off the bat, but they do have plans for later this year, it looks like. But if you're a user who's opted into the beta, then you have access to it right now. And as we segue from models and from AI art, I wanted to touch on PhotoGuard once again. And we covered this ages ago. I feel like this was maybe 7-8 months ago. It felt like just a GitHub project, but it was something that artists would be interested in if they wanted to really protect something that they planned on uploading online. And basically you've got a tiny program that changes the pixels of the image in such a way that it really just confuses AI scraping. It's interesting seeing headlines come around full circle like this, but I'll say the same thing I said last time I covered it. This doesn't seem like something that you as an artist should have to use yourself. The most convenient way that this could be done is if, let's say Twitter for example, you upload an image and it did it automatically as part of the upload process. But unfortunately if they did something like that for you, then that would prevent them from using your data later for the model that Elon's building. Based on what I saw here, it seems like the creator is really more interested in image manipulation in general and how dangerous that could be. Deep fakes and things like that. So it's maybe not so much about art theft or copyright like you might assume. As it turns out, a lot of people didn't even know that OpenAI had a tool that they were working on to detect AI written text. Of course, there's major concerns in the world of academia for scholastic dishonesty and things like that. The world we live in today is easier than ever to not cite a source and essentially get credit for things that you didn't think up. We have somehow accidentally stumbled into a world where knowledge seems free and you can just get the answers to most anything you want. But of course that has a downside when it comes to going to school and proving that you yourself have learned things, that you are creating original thought. And while those concerns are concerning, unfortunately we don't really have much of a solution for them because it turns out that detecting AI-generated text is harder than it seems. OpenAI has shut down GPT-0, which was the tool that they had created to essentially determine whether or not their tool was used to create something. It's a very interesting predicament to find themselves in, but it's probably largely due to the way that OpenAI's model actually outputs data. From what we've come to understand, especially recently, there's a series of different systems that go to work, and the final product isn't the output of a single model, it's the output of multiple expert models all put together. So imagine trying to take that output and running it backwards to determine where it came from when there's just so many layers of abstraction. And you probably get an idea of what OpenAI has been dealing with in determining whether or not something is AI generated. The article actually pointed out the ironic timing because this is right after OpenAI had just agreed to the voluntary commitment to develop AI ethically. But I honestly don't see the connection there. This is not a tool that worked great from the beginning, and it's not a tool that was getting better at all from what I could tell. So, Glorbo is not real, and I've seen a couple of articles about this now, and I'm trying to figure out if maybe I read one of the AI-generated articles, because I thought this was about Destiny 2, but this article I'm seeing it's about World of Warcraft. Regardless, it doesn't really matter what game it's supposed to be about. It's not something that is a real thing. It looks like this week Redditors put a plan in action to screw with AI scraping. They created a concept called Glorbo, which isn't real. They related it to World of Warcraft, and they waited. They waited to see if any of the AI scraping services would end up writing an article about Glorbo. And they did. So I guess there's some blog called The Portal, and it's supposed to publish gaming content powered by Z League. But I guess what it does is just scrapes Reddit. So it found a bunch of players talking about something that didn't exist. It assumed that this thing exists, and it wrote a whole article about it. It's a hilarious and ironic situation that's resulted in a number of threads like this, where people are just so excited to be able to finally talk about Glorbo. They're linking the article. The article's now been deleted, but one of the funniest things that I saw in here was that I guess it had actually captured the quote of, "Honestly, this feature makes me so happy, I really just want some major bot-operated news website to publish an article about this," which is just absolutely fantastic. And look, I'm going to say this without getting too deep, but if your whole company can basically replace the human element and it's just you and AI, it's not much of a company anymore. And you've created something that literally anyone else can do. So it's not going to be of value to many people. Now, some people, for some reason, think AI is going to take all the jobs but leave all of the bosses. And that's just not the reality. The world is going to adapt to that. But switching gears to a little bit of a lighter subject, let's talk about AI weapons. We've talked about Palantir a couple of times. I've mentioned Alex Karp. He is the CEO of Palantir. And I don't know if he just went and saw Oppenheimer or what, but he immediately wrote something called Our Oppenheimer Moment, and he's drawing parallels to himself and Robert Oppenheimer leading the Manhattan Project. But if I'm being honest, as I'm reading through this article, I'm not seeing anything new so much as I'm just seeing an opinion piece based on the current situation. You know, this is really just talking about the ethical concerns that Alex Karp and a lot of us are facing here. The United States, whether we like it or not, is a weapons creator. It's a manufacturer. It's a distributor. And this article talks about the open letter to pause AI development, which we know did nothing, but this isn't going to stop AI from being involved in future weapons. Now, as much as I also think that AI weapons sound scary and dangerous, I know for a fact that if we stopped working on them, that's not going to stop everyone else from working on them. In fact, that's an opportunity for other people to get ahead of us. And that, given the power dynamic of the world and everything like that, creates a lot more chaos for a lot of people. You can imagine how dangerous that might be if the balance of power completely shifted. It could affect billions upon billions of people. So, like everything else, I'll have a link in the description for this for you if you want to give it a read. But this one's not so much a news article about anything that recently took place this week. Feels like forever ago we talked about organoid intelligence, OI. You may remember there was a story from Australia, they called it a dish brain, where they were able to take brain cells and combine it with basic artificial intelligence. So yeah, as wild as this is a team that's exploring the idea of synthetic and biological intelligence kind of mixed together in a hope to create even better future large language models and artificial intelligence in general. While a lot of people have eyes on companies like Neuralink, I do think that things like this also give us a lot of insight on how the brain interacts with an outside source, for example. You know, for people who are excited about maybe one day getting cybernetic parts or whatever, this is probably a good step in that direction. Anyway, it's not there yet. The long and short of it is this company has got somebody's attention. They've got a $600,000 grant now, and they will hopefully be able to continue to work. In case you missed my last video or you didn't plan on reading through the article, they ended up using stem cells from a brain to create a machine learning program that could actually end up playing Pong. You can only imagine the wild benefits we could see if we could somehow close the gap between humans and machines and start to become kind of one and the same maybe. But of course that whole idea comes with a ton of fear, and so this company, just like everyone else, is dealing with AI safety and open letters being written and a lot of fear. So it's good to see that they're getting some support, and I guess we'll have to check in on them later and see what they end up coming up with. Ending today's video, I wanted to talk about a topic that freaks a lot of people out, and we actually talk about this quite a lot here on this channel. But I wanted to address something that Sam Altman said very specifically, because he talks about AI advocates. And while in some cases I might fit the bill as an AI advocate, I don't believe that the technology is only going to be good for workers. I think you've heard me say that ad nauseum. The thing that I wanted to talk about as I saw this wasn't necessarily that jobs are definitely going to be going away. I think that jobs are going to change. I think that the world is going to change. I've told people in my life and online going back almost a year now that ML-based AI is the next internet. It is modern computers. It's going to change the world in drastic ways that you couldn't predict. The internet, for example, made jobs go away. Computers made jobs go away, but they also created more jobs. I think it's incredibly important to remember that there's not a finite amount of jobs. There's not a finite amount of work to do. Most of the work that we actually do isn't necessary. So yes, while jobs are definitely going to be going away, jobs are definitely also going to be created in the process. There's going to be need for new types of roles that never existed before. And there are going to be jobs that didn't need to exist before. I'm not going to dig into Sam too hard because I have seen him get misquoted and misunderstood quite a lot, and it does look like he actually mentioned that it creates new jobs as well. Now, I'm not quite sure why the author here thought that late 19th century automation of telephone operations and the idea of moving the little thinger over from one thing to another if you were an operator, if that was like the best representation of what AI is doing to us now. I think computers was certainly a much more modern change. But the quote here is basically, when you get rid of operators, then basically young women are able to adjust, find new jobs, and were able to adapt. But the older women, they took a lifelong hit to wages, and they were never able to find a new job again. Which to me really just further reinforces the point that I was originally trying to make. It's going to be about adaptation. It's going to be about the economy adapting. It's going to be about businesses choosing to adapt. When the wave of AI art came, for example, you can go the Shutterstock route or you can go the Getty Images route. One of them is doing well. The other one tried to fight the wave and ended up in battles. I know that most of you guys who watch this stuff know a lot about artificial intelligence already. That's why you're interested in it, and that's why I showed up on your feed. But my hope is that I can reach a broader audience of people who don't really know about this stuff in general. For this very reason, actually, because the quicker that they get up to speed, the quicker that they realize what these capabilities are, and the quicker they're able to adapt, the more possibilities that they're going to have in this future that we're building together. Call me an optimist, but I don't think that AI is going to end the human race. And if I'm being completely honest, I think it has the capability of making us better than what we ever were before. And in a lot of cases, it seems like the biggest things preventing a lot of that stuff from happening are fears or greed. Now, of course, I'm not talking to this community. It feels at least like the community that I've fostered here is pretty calibrated with how I think in this regard. But I do hope to continue to see, as time goes on, more people continuing to kind of come into the fold and realizing that this stuff isn't as scary as all that. There's no way I can prove this at all, but I feel like all of these major scientific victories that we're seeing here, whether it's superconductivity or leaps in the quantum computer space, all of these things could have potentially come from AI-generated learning as well. And you can imagine if a leap like that got us to figure out a solution for something like climate change, for example. And that's what I see. That's the potential possibility of something like this. Because I can see that AI is far too powerful of a tool to put back in the box. That would be crazy at this point. But anyway, I feel like I'm rambling. I am going to end today's video. I appreciate you guys stopping by. I appreciate those of you especially who made it to the end of the video. The interaction, as always, really, really appreciate it, guys. I hope every one of you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week for another AI news, drama, and updates. Thank you for watching.